So as I was saying, we have a pretty packed agenda today where we're hoping to cover, three main topic areas, as well as featuring 2 audience polling questions around benchmarking analytics. Today, we hope to take you through some of the use cases for benchmarking and analytics, including some of the data that we're seeing being captured. We're also hoping to cover some of the challenges that our panelists have experienced in this area, as well as covering some of the lessons learned, including some insights on potentially, what hasn't worked in this space. But before I turn it over to the panelists, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. I know Sylvia mentioned my name is Melissa Miller. I'm a senior manager at EY Law, where I currently sit in EY's legal function consulting group. I have about 14 years experience, both as a practicing attorney and as a legal consultant professional, including about 5.5 years with EY. In my consulting role, I help both law departments and, legal function groups evaluate their talent, process, and technology in order to help organizations reduce risk, lower cost, improve optimization generally. So benchmarking and analytics is critically important in everything I do as a consultant. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. I think before we dive into the topics, I know Sylvia kind of introduced you and your roles, but with us today is a group of experts, and they're going to be sharing insights and experiences. So let's give them each a chance just to introduce themselves a little bit more before diving in. Orazio, do you want to begin?
Yeah, hi everyone, Orazio Difruscolo here, thanks for having me. I'm looking after legal and claims procurement at Swiss Re Group. Insurers, like all companies, have their own legal corporate spend. However, they also spend significant amount of legal fees to defend their corporate clients. And the beauty here is that these clients are from a variety of different sectors and industries. So to provide to those clients with the best possible representations, I need benchmark and analytics. I need to manage quality, costs, and risks for legal services providers. Also need to understand how effective and efficient our programs are in comparison to other companies. I need benchmark, and I need to compare ourselves with the past. I need to measure the progress with analytics. As many of you have been dealing with those topics throughout my career, and prior to procurement, I've been working for legal ops and in a variety of business management functions, feeding senior management with benchmark and analytics also during post-mergers and integration. I've been lucky enough to don't do this alone. I rely on insight from my hardworking teams, great internal clients, data scientists, as well as legal and IT services providers. Happy to share some of experiences on this topic. Of course, these are only my views and must not be understood as a statement made by any of the companies of the Swiss Re Group. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Andie, would you like to go next?
Sure. Andie Lam, I'm from Novartis. I've been with the company for over 7 years now. I spent forever in procurement, most of my life in professional services, and for the last 7 years supporting a legal function. I work with the general legal team very intimately on supporting the sourcing of the different types of services that they need, and also, of course, law firms. As you guys all know, there's like mountains and mountains of data, and analytics is definitely getting more and more important for us as we try to put the cost control over, what we're spending with the legal providers and law firms. So, happy to be on the panel here today. And, I'm very excited to learn from my peers, what they might have done differently in their own environment. And yeah, happy to share what I've, seen and done as well from my own experience.
Thank you. Joellen?
Hi, my name's Joellen Hatfield. I'm currently with Bunge Limited. My team at Bunge is responsible for an overall category called business administration. Within that, we have 4 verticals. One is HR spend, one is facilities related, financial services, and then legal and compliance, which I primarily focus on. And our department is quite busy. We work closely advising our internal customers and and partnering with them, getting involved in their plans and their strategies.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I think that brings us to the first topic that I outlined in the agenda, which are really, use cases that we see with benchmarking and analytics and the types of data that we're seeing being captured. Joellen, would you mind? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Would you mind kicking us off and just telling us some of the ways in which you're using benchmarking and analytics and just the types of data that you're measuring?
Okay, sure. So a couple of thoughts, I guess, to start off. With regard to benchmarking, that can be very valuable to you, looking at your current processes, current work procedures, and then your total cost. So looking externally, what are best practices, what's available? So one example would be contract lifecycle management. So internally, you might be doing everything manually. You go to the market, you look across at your peers, what are they doing, and you benchmark against that and identify the gaps and where you can improve. So a new tool, which entails new processes, new ways of working, that's a real good use of benchmarking. Another example might be alternative fee arrangements. You may have a couple that you use now, but benchmarking others, you find out new ideas and new structures for AFAs and what might work better for you when the goal is simply to control your cost and improve efficiency. I mean, generally, the metrics come in, they have to be relevant when you're measuring. We either measure internally how well we're doing with the process, or we're measuring our external suppliers. So speaking to that, when you want to measure your suppliers and how they're working and the value they're delivering, it's essential to work with your internal customer to understand what's important to them. Quite often, procurement's guilty of going off and setting up these metrics that are overly complex and really don't tell anybody anything they need to know. So you have to have your input from your internal client. And then also the suppliers themselves, they often have good ideas. They often have willing to step up. And then, you can discuss those and hold them accountable by including it in any kind of an agreement going forward. With these professional services, frankly, I go back to project management 101. Are you providing me quality deliverables? Are you managing your resources to not be passing unnecessary cost on to me? Are you staying with the timeline that we may have as very critical things that we have to meet? So those metrics have to be, I guess, to simplify, just very straightforward, very have integrity on how you manage or how you report those and measure them. If they're not relevant, frankly, it's just a waste of time. So that was just kind of my summary in order to separate the two, benchmarking and metrics.
Great, yeah. Andie, I mean, are you seeing similar use cases, or are there other use cases that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, over the course of the last few years, we definitely have research on a number of external sources, but also from internal. Even for the data that we have internally, we try to see, can we just do some analytics on what's a typical case may cost us, or per task, how would that look like, what's the average cost? And as much as we try, there are always nuances, right? If you don't dig into what's behind those numbers, what are some of these scenarios and assumptions, the averages are almost meaningless and misleading. And that's, you always have to watch out for those. They could be indicative data and a good guidance for you to take more, but you shouldn't be exploited or used in, without too much understanding of what's behind those numbers. And same goes for external sources of benchmark data too, because I mean, if you have money, you can buy all sorts of data. but a lot of those are, I have to say, are junk. You have to be very careful.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of our clients asking for vendor scorecard types of analytics and benchmarking and, against, various law firms that they're using. Orazio, what types of use cases are you seeing?
Well, let's say the most recent one is around predictive analytics. So the idea here is that we integrate internal and external data with the final, let's say, output is going to be to improve the legal matters outcome and to get some actionable insights. We actually went through a proof of concept around predictive budgeting, cycle time, and law firm ranking. And we got good results. Of course, we had to fine tune the model a couple of times, but we're really looking forward to the implementation of that. And then kind of a surprise was that users at the beginning did not believe in the data because they were simply not used to get good quality data. And then what we showed was, well, actually what you are selecting, if we take the example of law firm ranking, you're selecting the same law firms that also this model is suggesting you to select. So feel free to start to rely a little bit more on that. So that's, for me personally, is kind of the next frontier in the space.
Yeah, very.
And if I could add more, I hope the audience can hear me clearly now, because I saw a comment that somebody couldn't hear me. Let me know if it doesn't work out, and I'll try to adjust my microphone. One thing that I think we also want to put more emphasis is, the new environment now, and some of you might have already read it in the media too. We are measuring the staffing diversity of our law firms. We are looking into our e-billing data and see, are they meeting our D&I requirement? And this is not just, a check in the box, but more to mirror what is really in our society. Is this representative of our population in the country? Are law firms addressing this imperative, as we call it, and we're looking into our e-billing data to see, are they meeting our goals when it comes to D&I?
Really interesting.
Yeah, the billing tools really do offer a lot of opportunities to get down to some very critical items that you can measure and you can report on, which, years ago we didn't have the benefit of those, right? So you can now look across, like Andie just said, and check diversity. You can check staffing. Are they using a reasonable staffing model for a given matter? We didn't have that visibility previously, and we've been looking at that quite a bit too. Does everybody need to be the senior partner when it's a simple filing? And the answer is no. And yet now you have visibility into that and you can question it.
It looks like there was a question that came in just regarding the D&I, and Andie, I don't know if we can address this now. It just says what actions are being taken with the firms that are falling short of your D&I goals. I know this is a hot topic. It's obviously not necessarily benchmarking analytics, but you want to just take a quick minute to maybe address that. I think it's very relevant.
Yeah, I'll go in a quick one because I don't want to digress too much.
Yeah.
So what we do agree upon with our preferred panel firms are, if they cannot meet our requirements, then there will be a clawback.
Great, thank you. Yep, and so it looks like there'll be a couple of questions, and we will leave a couple of minutes at the end for additional questions. We'll try to get them as we go, but if there are a number of them, we will leave about 5 minutes at the end that will be time for questions. So I think that we can go to our audience polling question number 1, which we've just heard some of the panelists here talk about their relevant use cases for benchmarking and analytics, but we're curious, just in the next 6 to 12 months or so, where are the most urgent needs, would you say, for benchmarking and analytics in your current positions? You can choose more than one. Panelists, you are not allowed to vote, but we're just curious to see. I heard Joellen, sorry, mention contract management. I know a lot of our clients are are looking for a lot of these things, including legal intake and workflow. I heard e-billing mentioned here as well. So we'll give everybody a minute to vote, and then we'll address. And, you know, as we're waiting for the results, I would say just, you know, looking at these options, I expect an even heat. So I don't know if panelists, you want to take wagers. You know, I think these are all, I was like, check all, I probably, you know, should have said check all of the above, right? Because I think we're all nodding our heads like, yeah, these are all really important topics. So
the results are ready whenever you want them, Melissa.
Yep, go ahead. If you want to go ahead and display them, we, you know, won't take too much time going through this, but just want to, you know, see where, oh, okay, e-billing and invoice review is a pretty clear winner here. And, you know, with contract management sort of and legal intake following 2, 3. Panelists, does anything about that surprise you? Pretty much in line with what you would say. I think, you know, the e-billing and the invoice review do seem to often be separated from some of the other more like holistic solutions, right? As like maybe an easier 1-2 type of thing to be able to look at on its own. So I'm not completely surprised, but just, you know, good to know where you are. And, you know, panelists obviously keep that in mind as we go forward with our questions. So with that, I think we can turn to, you know, the next kind of topic area that we outlined, which are some of the challenges associated with data gathering and just benchmarking and analytics with what you're doing now. Orazio, would you want to take us through some of the challenges you've experienced in your role?
Well, let me digress for a moment.
Sure.
Many of us enjoying home office, but I'm not always alone. This is an evidence. I'm showing you this. Well, maybe I've just been in the lockdown for too long. But my point is that I would like to get my pieces of data to be like a Lego. Well, why? My point is that every Lego brick is almost perfect. They always fit wonderfully. And although I have to work a little bit on visualization here, they should read data. We can say, yeah, of course, they are #1 benchmark for accuracy. They are made by high quality material. But unfortunately, many times data are everything but a Lego. And I think this could be almost everyone's experience. So to answer to your question, Melissa, I see at least 2 main challenges. So the first one for me is data quality. The second would be align and combine data. After we fix those 2 basic challenges, then in my view, all other items like how to build advanced analytics, how to get to a single vision of truth, or what technology to use and so on, then they will become much clearer. So if we start with quality, we're unfortunately all familiar with the concept rubbish in, rubbish out. And to avoid this, we need to invest in, my view, in preventative maintenance. What I mean by this is get the data right first helps me to get the right data and consequently quality benchmark and analytics. The point is that to get it there requires a lot of work. And marginal improvements that we may get sometimes is not always worth the investment in resources, time, effort, although there are instead moments where actually it's absolutely worth it. So how to simplify this is work to create some self-policing mechanism like the e-billing and invoice review. So I'm glad to see this clear winner from the audience pulling questions. Because with my team, actually, we gained some experience here. And one of the problems that we had to solve is that we realized, looking at the data, that we had a very low percentage of invoice adjusted. And it meant that either we got billed very precisely, but it was too nice to be true, or maybe we could have done some better job in reviewing invoices. And of course, the right answer was the last one. So we work with the service provider to outsource the invoice review and automate this also with the help of a piece of machine learning and automate these repetitive tasks. And why is this important? Because we get granular quality data. So I think that that was also kind of the, I heard the other panelists and the audience say, yeah, e-billing, this is kind of fundamental. The beauty is that if we analyzing those type of data also with the use of some pieces of technology, we get a sense from structured data, which are really, they're not always good quality. I've seen the same law firms using different task code for similar tasks, as an example. But the beauty of some pieces of technology is that can help to make a sense from unstructured data. So in that way, the task code or the task we can rearrange in a way that makes sense for us. And we have done this for more than 2 years now. And now with the team using from the same piece of technology, working with a partner, we're now launching the predictive analytics piece. So I think that if we get those basics, those bricks, right, then we can build and combine it and so on.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, I hear a lot too that people have, you know, issues with just merging data from just different sources, right? Like aligning data and, you know, there's different systems. You know, Joanne, Andie, Orazio, if you want to chime back in, like, are you seeing that as a major challenge in your roles, or are there any other major challenges that you're seeing?
That the data alignment is quite challenging. Most all of our large corporations will use an accounts payable system like SAP. So you go to SAP, you look up a law firm and you see X dollars, but you go over to the billing tool and you see a completely different amount. So there's continual challenges between the two. So timing has a lot to do with it. Have the bill in the invoicing tool. If it hasn't been approved, it doesn't go into SAP. So you have continually these alignment issues. So you agree for reporting purposes on what's the source of truth. In our case, I mean, it's the billing tool. So how much is the company owing a particular law firm, and for what matters? You got to get that out of the billing tool. The billing tool also allows you to enforce compliance with the billing rates that you may have in place, or the alternative fee arrangements. You would not be able to do that in your accounts payable system. So that's another thing that those tools can offer, and that's the compliance. They have, for example, a rate sheet process, and the law firm loads by its timekeepers, each timekeeper their hourly rate, etc. And literally they cannot invoice with this different amount. This is what they're bound to. So it avoids all this back and forth between the responsible attorney, their time taken up, haggling over things, and the law firm, then their payments being withheld. So it gives you that automation, but it also ensures compliance. So you can actually say to management, we are controlling costs and this is how we're doing it. I think those systems do offer quite a lot of features to assist you with compliance.
Thanks. Andie?
I agree with everything that Joellen just said. We have the same challenges, and you just, you know, at a certain point, you just have to agree what's the real, source of truth, because you're never going to be able to bridge the gap. The gaps are there forever. you sometimes you might never find the real causes of it because they are just treated in a different way. If you take a little deeper into more granular level of the e-billing data, even, I mean, you think about the UTPMS code with all its flaws, but put that aside for time being, it is being interpreted in 1,000 different ways by the law firms, right? For the same task, a law firm could use this code, and then another firm could use a completely different code. So that's just another watch out when you look at the data and see, you have to understand what you're really looking at, and is when you draw those conclusions, you also have to remember what's behind those.
In terms of kind of displaying the analytics, I guess, or the data that you're finding, is there an effective way that you're seeing to best kind of display and disseminate the information amongst your colleagues or just within your team?
So I think at the end of the day, I think as Orazio say, data are data. You can do all sorts of fancy analytics on it, but at the end of the day, if you don't know how to translate that into actionable items, they are meaningless. Especially, I think the most important step is to how to translate that into something that is meaningful to the legal department, to the lawyers. What are you really trying to say? What do you really want them to get out of those analytics? That's the key. So that goes back to the fundamental question of what are the objectives? You can perform all sorts of analytics, whatever you want, endless, but you have to understand what you're really trying to get at. That's the starting point, and then you go to find out the ways how to utilize the data and analyze them. And then the next important step, as I said before, is okay, now that you have the result, you understand what you're doing, but how do you translate that to something that is actually understandable and actionable for the lawyers? That's the key.
And so as a challenge, just, to the group, would you say just kind of the continuous evolution of making sure that this model is improving is one of the biggest challenges, right? Data is constantly changing. Then, just kind of the model that you just described, right? Like getting the data and then making it meaningful and then making it actionable, I think, and then obviously keeping it flowing and making sure that it continues to be that way. Is that just kind of in a sum the biggest challenge you think this with benchmarking and analytics?
Yes, but I think what we shouldn't forget is the human element. At the end of it, data is data. They're there as is. You can manipulate it in 1,000 ways. But I think we also have to remember always is there's the human element of it. Meaning, yeah, these are all the objective conclusions, but how it's going to be taken by the lawyers, you have to take that into account too, because that might be interpreted into various ways depending on the personality of the lawyers. And you have to, because lawyers are very good at pushing back, right? They can always cite 10,000 reasons as to why that data is not reliable, and you have to understand where they're coming from. And it would be better if you have a little bit knowledge of that lawyer or whoever you're presenting the data, and be able to actually understand from their point of view why they might come up with those counter propositions, and take that into account and then explain why. Okay, this, I understand your reasoning, but in spite of that, we can still get something valuable from that data set and analytics. That's what you want to get at. And it's not one approach for everybody. You just have to adjust it as you go, depending on the person that you are presenting this to.
That's really a good point about the personal aspect. Quite often we're seeing people that just want to stare at a screen of data day in and day out and make pretty charts. And that's not your business strategy. It's, your data and your analytics are an input into your business strategy. But in order to operate more effectively and efficiently and develop that strategy, you need to have those relationships so that you can have those difficult conversations. If the data is presenting something that's not favorable to a party and they're going to push back, in advance, if you have a relationship with that person, you can have that conversation without it getting tense or any pushback. So yes, I caution, especially procurement, they're guilty of this, of just everything's data, and that's not the way business works. You have to have those relationships.
Absolutely. So building on Andie and Joellen, this is a people business. And we definitely need to try to understand what business is trying to achieve. And if we understand that, then we can steer the conversation, and then we can try to be very specific and narrowing down, and then be very confident of our data eventually.
Thank you so much. I mean, it sounds that everybody agrees, and you're right. I think we do forget about the people aspect of it. So really good call out, and thank you so much for those sharing your challenges with us. I think that takes us to the next audience polling question, which just is we're also curious about the challenges that you're facing. We've heard a lot about data and different sources and just the trickiness, I think, of data in general. But what are some of the biggest challenges that you've encountered just trying to gather the relevant data for benchmarking and analytics? We understand that maybe these options aren't quite in their entirety, but we did our best to kind of cover the main areas where we know that there are current challenges. Just based on what we've heard the panelists say, I think merging data from different sources, if I'm guessing, is going to be pretty high on the list. And then I think also what are the key metrics, right? Like the people aspect of it, and when you get a bunch of numbers in and a bunch of data, how to turn that into actionable data. So we'll see. I don't know if any of the panelists have any comments as we're kind of waiting for this to get filled in. Okay, it's pretty even across a couple of different categories. I think we're not surprised at the three that are leading the pack there, right? The converting it into actionable improvement, which we heard Andie talk about in some of her challenges, and then knowing where the data lives and how to collect it, and when it's coming from different sources. So it sounds as if a lot of people here participating have very similar experiences, to our panelists. So thank you very much for answering and following along there. And so I think we can segue into kind of our last topic that we are hoping to hear from our panelists and some of their experiences, which is some of the lessons learned. We've heard really great use cases on how we've used benchmarking in analytics and in data in their jobs, and then we've also heard obviously some of the challenges, but really like sometimes things just there's an impact on what doesn't work, and we can really learn from those. So Andie, do you want to start and just kind of tell us maybe something that hasn't worked for you, or just a lesson learned that you've had along the way?
In the beginning when I started on this role, I think I was being a geek. I was playing with the numbers like crazy. I was like, oh, this is fun. And then and then I would end up doing all sorts of fancy things with the numbers. As much as I enjoy it, as I alluded earlier, you can have all these things, analytics as much as you like, but at the end of the day, it goes back to what are you trying to get at? And in the beginning when I was doing this, I was like, oh, yeah, I have all these fancy dashboards, but a lot of them actually didn't end up being used anywhere. It's probably more for my enjoyment other than anything else. So that's a watch out. Don't do what I did. You have to set your purpose first before you dive into the data. Another thing is, as I said earlier, don't forget the human element. Data are supposed to be objective, you would think, but they're really not. There are always nuances to it, and they're definitely subject to human interpretations, whether it's internal or external data. We spend money on buying external sources of benchmark data too, and when we compare it to our internal data, sometimes it's like that doesn't make sense. And there could be various reasons, one of which is there's always a time lag, right? By the time you get those benchmarks, they're probably outdated by now, especially in this day and age where things are moving so quickly. There's also is like there are averages, but you have to watch out, to what's your unique situation, and there are two sides of the coin. They're good references, but you also need to know, what are some of the things that you probably should apply to your own company's data. um, and the human element I cannot emphasize more, because there are always 10,000 different reasons why, from the lawyers, why they won't use it at the end of the result, no matter how strong your case is. Because, to the panel's discussion earlier, the the relationship trumps everything almost. I mean, yes, data is objective, more objective than personal relationships, but there are also a lot of subtleties. There's the know-how, there's the relationship built with a certain provider or law firm, and there's a efficiency that you cannot measure, or at least not measure as easily as you want to, and that you have to take those into account too when you're trying to build a case for change.
Yeah, those are all good points. I think one mistake or one thing that we build these really great charts and graphs, and we're trying to say, for example, report, are we using our panel firms like we intended to use them? So you see this outlier and you're this new firm, all of a sudden spend is kicked up. And so the way you're reporting it and presenting it to the GC, the general counsel, is, oh, somebody's not in compliance with the program. And then you find out we have some sort of incident or matter that is critical to the life of the business, that the attorney that was handling it at one of the panel firms moved to a new firm, and we simply wanted to keep that person because the efficiency of losing that knowledge would not have been worth any kind of cost issue associated with having a new firm. So that's an example of Andie, what she was explaining on the relationship side, and understanding the business and understanding what's important. Quite often we have analytics teams that may be remote or not connected to the business. And if you rely on a report from them, sometimes it'll come through and it's like, well, what does this tell me? This is not useful information. So we have to be careful with that. That would be one lesson.
Well, for me, it's really similar to what we heard from Andie and Joellen, is the ability to transform data into information and then move from information into insights, but eventually get the ability to provide a point of view around quality, cost, and risks. And my lesson learned was, okay, let's bring the business as soon as possible, and then along the journey, validate with them during this process, and it will, help us to save so much time. So absolutely, buying and get people who are willing to go in the journey together.
I hear a lot, a lot of my clients will use the words like procurement maturity in connection with benchmarking and analytics, right? And so I feel that they think like, if we're not doing things that are, necessarily, they think that's what's the key to, I guess, considering themselves a mature department. I guess, could you just give some insights? I know you just gave some of your, lessons learned, but just in general, like, when it comes to benchmarking and analytics, I've heard panel firms and, analytics teams, and then maturity, just in general, like business cases as well. How would you say you would rank, maturity of a procurement department? If, I know benchmarking and analytics is key to it, but just in terms of data, what would make a mature procurement department?
Well, I can start. Having worked at several companies in my career, I can tell you when it's recognized that the data sets coming from different disparate systems are not aligned, that that's an issue. So the issue then is addressed. It's put into a database where you have analysts who then sort through it and can strip out the duplicates, for example, or the irrelevant, or the multiple spellings of the same name, et cetera, okay? And can handle the FX issues, especially in our global corporations that we're part of. When you see the opposite, that would be the mature side, the less mature, the other end of the spectrum would be continuing to have discussions and arguments in air quotes about, is this the accurate data, or is this wrong, or taking data and just dumping it on somebody's PC and saying, hey, you guys go sort it out. It's completely ineffective and a waste of time. So you have those two opposites, I think. A more mature procurement organization should understand that the billing tool in legal might not belong to procurement, but that doesn't mean it's irrelevant and you can't use the data. Staying focused on, oh my goodness, if it's not an SAP PO, it's not relevant, that doesn't help the organization at all. So I think, again, you're looking at that data that's normalized and can be used as much as possible. And that those resources and costs to get that done are committed to by the organization. And that would be the ideal type of procurement group.
That makes sense. And then, just one other question. In terms of reducing risk, I think I've heard that a couple of times in terms of use cases and just, in general. Can you give some examples of just, benchmarking and analytics in conjunction with reducing risk?
Maybe I can have a first go. One example, and we heard also from the other panelists, is around compliance with our own billing guidelines. And in many cases, those guidelines have been around for many, many years, and sometimes they are also can be very long or maybe conflicting among themselves. So it could be a good opportunity if we mature to review those and to get better compliance. So this is one piece. Also, to coming back to your previous questions in terms of maturity, we heard a lot about, it's coming from procurement, their ability to maintain good relationships with our business partner, internal clients, but it's also correlated with the willingness from the business to invest time around vendor management topics. And I saw strong correlations. When this is happening, we got great results.
Andie, do you have anything to add? If not, we can.
Well, I suppose it's not so much measuring risk, because we do have slightly different process, shall I say, when it comes to measuring the what we call third-party risk management process for all our law firms and providers and suppliers. A very, very tedious process, measuring different areas. And we look at it from various different angles, right? It's not so much benchmarking, but doing our due diligence to make sure that whoever that we are going to engage will land us in some sort of hot water, make sure that they're not bribing some officials, or they're not ending in a data breach situation. Different risks that it could pose to the organization, but that's a very different process for our company.
There was a question for you, Joellen, going back to staffing. It says, how do you decide on what is reasonable for staffing?
Okay, so there are models in professional services world of what's optimal when you're staffing a project, depending on the type of project. So they can be a pyramid, inverted pyramid, diamond, there's different shapes. So what you want to do is the highest billers or timekeepers you look at the titles and how is your project staffed. So what is the expertise needed for the project or the matter? Who's, primarily doing the representation or any kind of the more rudimentary task on the project. So if they come to you and they tell you all the senior partner, and you don't see any other titles, you should just begs the question, come on, who's doing all the work? Because we all know that there's all kinds of tasks associated and work associated, and you're not going to be paying for those folks. At the same time, if you have a critical matter to your company, do you want the junior associate assigned to it? No, you may want a more senior person. If it's save the company type of litigation, for heaven's sake, it might be most important to get whoever is best qualified. So I guess to sum it up, you're looking at what's the best fit for the work. It's not always the highest biller or the most strategic level, but it's also not the paralegal or the junior associate either. You have to have some reasonableness around that staffing.
Great, thank you so much, Joellen. We're going to try to get through just a couple more questions in a couple of minutes, if we can. And one of them was just building on a previous point that Andie had made about what is the data for. The question is, how do you get busy, skeptical attorneys to engage with benchmarking data and to care about it? If one of you wants to take the lead on that.
If I can, I think Joellen hit it on the nail just now. It's like at the end of the day, it's the relationship. You're not going to be with the best data in the world that you could have, the best analytics. You're not going to be able to convince a lawyer because they are very smart people with a lot of very quick thinking in coming up with 10,000 other reasons why they shouldn't listen to you. So relationship is definitely the key here. Once you build a rapport with the lawyer, they would be more open to listen to what you have to say and offer. And it's going to be more of a conversation rather than a debate.
And I think we might have time for just one final question. There was a question that came in. Are there best practices for merging and normalizing data? If so, how? Best practices, I know, is often a loaded question that perhaps would require a little bit more of an in-depth discussion in order for our panelists to really answer fully. I don't know if Joellen, you wanted to just give a high level. If not, we can move on to maybe one more question.
I would just like to say it's worth putting the resources into having someone doing that. Right now you might be sitting there having well-compensated professional MBAs sitting there looking at line item by line item. Come on, there are IT tools out there. There are, other teams that could be doing it. So again, take and make the case to make an investment.